Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at some of the guns they're selling in their April of 2016 premiere auction. And I have one here that ties into a set of guns that we took a look at not long ago. James Reid, My Friend Knuckledusters. These were a really kind of unique, interesting little knuckle duster pepperbox derringer sort of pistol made by a New York gunsmith by the name of James Reid in the Catskill Mountains. Well, before he made those, the same James Reid was living in New York City and he was making traditional style revolvers. He's much better known for the little knuckle duster derringers because he managed to produce a whole ton of them. They turned out to be quite popular. But I thought it'd be really cool to take a look at one of his earlier Civil War era revolvers. Now this is kind of interesting in that it uses modern style rimfire cartridges despite being manufactured during the Civil War, 1862 to 1864, in the case of this specific revolver. If you've watched a bunch of my videos on some of these other early revolvers, you will know that during that time, Rollin White had patented the concept of a bored-through cylinder, and technically he had a monopoly on the use of cylinders like this that would use what we think of today as typical rimfire style cartridges. He had sold exclusive license to that patent to Smith & Wesson, and so everyone else who was making these revolvers got sued for copyright infringement or patent infringement. Did that happen to Reid? No, interestingly it did not. Reid is one of a handful of gun makers who just blatantly violated the Rollin White patent because he recognized that there were existing patents in Europe already for this sort of thing, basically didn't recognize Rollin White's patent as being valid. And he didn't end up producing enough guns to really draw the attention of Smith & Wesson or Rollin White's lawyers. Now it's interesting that this gun, and in fact many of his others, don't actually have his name on them. That was kind of a way to be careful about potential lawsuits, make it a little harder to track down where the guns were coming from by not labeling them. Instead, these guns are labeled with the names of his sales agents, and as time went on, his agents got a little bit paranoid, a little bit spooked by the many legal actions filed by Rollin White against patent infringers. And so by the end, they were really cutting down the type of guns that they were willing to buy with even their names inscribed on them. In total, James Reid had 4 different models of revolver that he was making during the Civil War. The Model 1, 2, 3, and 4. The Model 1 was like this, but in 22 caliber. The Model 2 is this guy in 32 caliber. The Model 3 is actually a percussion revolver made potentially to avoid legal issues because that was still not that was a technology that anyone could manufacture. And then a Model 4 based on his own patent. So why don't we go ahead and take a closer look at this guy. Let me show you some of the interesting elements to it because it's got some features that are not so great. In fact, they're really not great, and it's got some features that are rather ahead of their time. So as I mentioned, this is a cartridge revolver. You can see that we have a very traditional style cylinder here. We have an ejector rod, and one of the cool things is that we have a loading gate. It is a hidden loading gate, and in order to open it, I'll put the gun at half cock, and there's this little teeny tab right there. And I pull that back, and it unlatches this loading gate. So I now have a little depression in the frame that allows me to rotate the cylinder into position and load cartridges. I mentioned this was in 32 caliber. It is a 7-shot revolver, as were all of Reid's Model 1 and Model 2 rimfire pistols. However, it doesn't use a standard cartridge. It uses Reid's own proprietary 32 caliber cartridge. These guns were actually made both with and without ejector rods. If you got an early gun before about serial number 1100, I guess you'd just have to come up with something else to get the cases out with because it didn't have an ejector rod on the gun. You'll notice these have a sheath trigger. This was not uncommon at this period. The need for a trigger guard wasn't really seen when the trigger only works if the gun's already cocked. So now this particular gun is serial number 1383. And I want to take a minute to discuss some of the serial number issues with these guns because there are a few. For one thing, Reid's numbering system or marking system kind of fluctuated a lot. And you'll find the numbers at different places on different guns without a whole lot of rhyme or reason. Sometimes they'll be on the butt strap, sometimes under the barrel, sometimes on the frame under the grips. Sometimes the barrel number will be the complete serial number. Sometimes it'll only be the last 2 digits. Really, there's a lot of fluctuation there. There were also a couple different versions of the top of the frame. This is the flat style because it's flat. The early guns up before about serial number 1100 had a hump here because this screw, which is used as the pivot point for this loading gate, this screw was originally located above the tip of the hammer instead of below. When I put this to half cock, you can see that there's a cutout directly under the hammer, just so that it can just barely clear that screw. And then the hammer is relieved enough that the hammer doesn't actually hit the screw, it hits the frame to stop. You will also sometimes find these guns with a much shorter screw that only goes into the right side of the frame here. Now, the other issue with Reid's serial numbers is that for all of his 4 different revolvers, he used a single serial number range. So he started at 1 and he ended up going to about 3,500. So you'll find the different models of revolver intermixed in that serial range because he was making several different types at any given time. So in total, this No.2 revolver he made about 1,160 of, and you'll find them scattered between serial number basically 400 and 2,900. So this is a 7-shot cylinder, and one of Reid's marketing points with this gun was that you could fire as many as 100 rounds without needing to clean it because it just wouldn't foul, apparently, which is kind of bogus. It definitely would foul, just like any black powder revolver would. However, it seems like the reason that he mentioned this was there's a rather unusual and not ideal design for holding the cylinder in place. Typically, you'll get a cylinder axis pin that you can take out from the front and it goes all the way through and it holds the cylinder in place. That's not what Reid did. On these revolvers, the cylinder axis pin only goes in just to the very front bit of the cylinder, and then there's a ratchet on the back that is actually embedded in the cylinder to help it rotate. So that's what gives you, support at the front and back of the cylinder. The problem is you have to pull the cylinder forward to get it off this ratchet at the back. You can't do that because the barrel's threaded back against the cylinder. So you actually legitimately have to unthread the barrel in order to take the cylinder out. And that's a terrible idea, especially for a firearm that might be in military service, which of course these probably were, given that these were being sold during the Civil War. So Reid's claim that these didn't foul enough that you'd need to clean them is probably a way of trying to deflect complaints about this really unfortunate cylinder removal system. It's kind of funny, there's only one good book out there on these guns, and it notes one particular example of a pistol where the buyer was apparently so frustrated with this system and having to unthread his barrel to clean it that he actually cut off the extra threading on the barrel, which seems like a fine idea until you realize that that means that every time you fire, the bullet's got to jump this 1/4-inch gap between the cylinder and the barrel. But apparently at least one person was so annoyed with removing the barrel that they were willing to deal with that and just did it. Ultimately, around the end of the Civil War, James Reid moved. He relocated from New York up into the Catskills in upstate New York and opened his factory up there, and that is when he started manufacturing his My Friend knuckle dusters, which is ultimately what we know him for much better today. But these revolvers are actually, I think, quite interesting. They've got that great mix of good and bad features, and one of the few cartridge revolvers that was manufactured, well, blatantly in disrespect to the Rollin White patent during the Civil War. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you are interested in early cartridge revolvers, this is certainly a neat one to check out. And if you'd like to add it to your own collection of early cartridge revolvers, complete with all of its pros and cons, well, take a look at the description below the video. You'll find a link there to Rock Island's catalog page on this gun. You can check out their pictures and their description, and if you'd like to have it, you can place a bid for it right through their website. Thanks for watching.